If you've never heard of the Ultima series before, you're certainly not the only one. I hadn't heard of it at all before about a year ago myself, but now that I have, it's something that I can't stop thinking about. Ultima IV Quest of the Avatar is one of a few on a short list of games that I almost deserted entirely after starting. The Master System version I was playing really tested my patience with its confusing menus and its unintuitive travel mechanics. Like many other 8-bit RPGs, the included map was really no help at all even after translating the locations using the manual, and the first battles that I undertook beat me to within inches of my life. As is the case with most other long-winded role-playing games that I start up, I didn't know where to go or what to do, but somehow Ultima IV felt significantly more frustrating than other games. Even the smallest things like healing up after battle felt like a tremendous amount of work. Nobody told me that I couldn't buy pre-made healing items and that I'd have to make my own. I also had no idea, for a very long time, that I was getting ripped off buying spell reagents in certain towns because they could have been found cheaper elsewhere. The most crushing aspect of the beginning of the game was that not too long after starting up, I had pages and pages of notes from townspeople and no clue what was actually important out of all of it. If I ran into a dead end, I had no idea if I'd maybe missed talking to somebody that was tucked slightly out of sight in a town, or if the information that I needed was maybe in a place I hadn't even visited yet and maybe didn't even know existed. The real kicker for me was the very first time I found out that some walls could be walked through. In the Master System version of the game, the difference in the bricks and passable walls is so subtle that I would have never noticed it until I saw an NPC pass through and wondered how they did that. I remember feeling the frustration rising up in me so much, and I wondered how many of them I'd missed. At that point in the game, I was quite a ways in, and I was thinking, how much backtracking am I going to have to do to be able to find them all? At that moment, I found it to be incredibly overwhelming. I felt like I could just throw the game out the window, walk away, and never look back. In hindsight, I'm really glad that I didn't start running full speed away from Ultima IV in those initial hours. After some good advice from a friend to read the history of Britannia, things started to make a little bit more sense. The game itself tells you to read the history in its introduction, but I was wrong to think that it might be accessible in-game since my copy of the game didn't come with a physical book. After reading, though things were still mostly muddy, a few things clicked into place for me. With a little bit more mentoring and encouragement from friends during live stream sessions, I was able to begin recruiting new party members and found a few runes. After talking to enough townspeople, eventually I uncovered a shrine location or two, and even spontaneously stumbled upon my first dungeon entrance. Soon after that, I was dungeon crawling confidently, sailing the open seas in search of new locations, and fighting pirates with gusto. I finally had a handle on Britannia and all its little quirks. Ultima IV very quickly became one of my favorite games after the growing pains subsided, and there's a few really good reasons for that. After playing so many other turn-based RPGs, Ultima was a breath of fresh air when it came to self-sufficiency. I know that I just finished whining about having to make spells from scratch, but even though it was initially really tedious to be planning out which reagents I'd need for specific spells, after I was familiar with where I could find the cheapest reagent shops, it was a breeze. Having to mix up spells in advance of battles forced me to be a responsible player and anticipate the unknowns instead of letting them bowl me over. Seeing my planning pay off gave me a lot of satisfaction, especially while dungeon crawling. Turning up on the doorstep of a pile of reapers and having a large stock of tremor on hand to obliterate them with was an amazing feeling. Unlike a lot of other turn-based RPGs where things are conveniently there when you need them, Ultima IV gave me an incredible sense of accomplishment when things worked out. If I ended up in a situation where I needed something and wasn't prepared, it was nobody's fault but my own. The beauty of the game is that there are no surprises except for the ones that you create for yourself. One thing that I really appreciated was how Ultima IV's enemy encounters scaled up as your party members' levels increase, unlike in other games where you kinda cross a bridge on an overworld map and might end up nose to nose with an enemy that takes out your entire party. Though some types of enemies like Balrons and Reapers were difficult no matter which stage of the game that you were in, most surface encounters were pretty manageable. If I was suddenly taking too much damage in battle, I knew that it was time to go and find some better equipment. The mystery of where the next best piece of equipment was also ties into the preparedness piece I mentioned earlier. Making sure that you visited every shop to see their wares and to know where to go for an upgrade was crucial to your success. I felt upgrading weapons and armor was very instinctive in this game. I wasn't stuck exploring an obscure dungeon for my next upgrade, or wondering where to go to find it. Every piece of equipment, obviously with the exception of the mystic weapons and armor, were available to me from the very moment I turned the game on. If not for the sometimes very steep price tag on some items, it's possible to power up your party pretty early on in the game. Though I didn't do this, it was really nice to have the option to. I obviously can't really talk about Ultima IV without mentioning the morality system and the virtues. I haven't played a lot of games myself where being a good person is important, and if I'm being completely honest, I generally make my way through games as a ruthless conqueror, letting the countryside ablaze in my wake. Ultima IV's entire premise is centralized around the concept of becoming an avatar, and that's a title that embodies a life lived on the ethical high road. The 8 virtues that you're striving to personify in-game are qualities by which we measure both ourselves and others, and without needing too much prompting, I was thankfully well on my way to becoming a full avatar. Of the 8 virtues, I personally found sacrifice, spirituality, and valor the easiest. I crushed my enemies, donated to beggars, and gave my blood at the healer, but I did struggle sometimes with the other virtues, a lot more than I thought I would actually. If I had to choose one of the 8 virtues that I struggled with the most, it would be compassion. From the get-go, I wanted to become all-powerful immediately and level up my main character so that I could recruit more party members, but so many low-level enemies would try to flee from me. I hated letting them go because taking their lives would directly lead to me becoming stronger, and I really had to fight my learned RPG instincts in these cases. In the end, more often than not, I'd let orcs and skeletons flee from me rather than kill them, but learning to balance compassion and valor was a tough task for me. I also had a little bit of trouble with honesty. Though I never actually did underpay for reagents with the blind shopkeepers, sometimes money was really tight and I kind of wondered what it would be like to get away with it. These temptations to be a bad person were challenging for me and got me thinking about my own moral compass and consequently my inner selfishness. These little whispers of doubt in the good path that I was on and the introspection that resulted from them really made the game compelling and interesting to me as a first-time player. I did a bit of soul-searching whenever a new virtue-gaining scenario presented itself, and I surprised myself a lot. I couldn't believe that I'd even consider stealing from a blind woman or feel frustrated about giving blood because it would inconvenience me in battle. I was really surprised at just how much Ultima IV made me think. Sure, these days there's quite a few games out there that test your ethics, but Ultima IV was years and years ahead of those with a very sound execution. The little sprite that I was controlling in Ultima IV was really me in the truest sense, because the struggle to be a good person was a real battle in the face of not only the game's parameters, but also in my own conscience as well. That's not something that you see every day in a video game, especially not one from the early 80s. Ultima IV's ending was by far one of my very favorite parts of the game. I kept joking the whole way through my playthrough that there would probably be some kind of quiz at the end, and I wasn't all that surprised that it turned out to be true. I was happy to see that the ending wasn't the usual, "You've saved the world and conquered the ultimate evil," but was instead a rather simple message about being a good person and living by example. In Ultima IV, you earned your title of hero, and you had to struggle to become an example to others rather than having it foisted upon you by some ancient prophecy about your destiny. People recognize you for your deeds rather than for your name, and by completing the quest of the Avatar, you become the new hope for the people in a time of peace. The story of the protagonist in Ultima IV could be the story of any person. Everyone has the capacity to take the higher ground in life and to emulate the very best of human nature. Not every person can see themselves in a warrior on an epic quest in a fantasy world, but anybody can be the humble avatar. That's what makes the game special and unique to anyone playing it, because no two people will go through the exact same motions to get to the same endpoint. Ultima IV is a very personal journey from both the objective and subjective standpoints. The quest of the Avatar is your story, and that's something that I've never experienced in a game before playing this wonderful little adventure. There's something really special about playing these old games that laid down the foundation that modern RPGs were built upon. Ultima IV was a heavy contributor in the 80s, and it reached many different people by way of many different platforms, and really, it's amazing that it's still continuing to affect people even now, like me. For me personally, even though it's been a while since I finished playing Ultima IV, I still find myself thinking about it a lot despite having moved on to other games. A big part of its luster is the back-to-basics nature of Ultima IV's gameplay that continually reminds me how spoiled I am playing through other 8-bit and some 16-bit RPGs. Every time I buy a healing potion at a shop or cast a spell without having to find the recipe from some obscure townsperson in a secret passage, I feel so appreciative knowing where these quality of life changes stemmed from. I know that the prospect of fumbling your way through a seemingly clunky game like Ultima IV might seem daunting, but there's so much complexity and richness just beneath the surface of this game that's worth exploring and experiencing firsthand. As an Ultima convert, I implore you to give this game and others like it a shot. If you're in the mood for a game that exercises your mindfulness and helps you to evaluate the very core of your being, Ultima IV is just the game to sweep you off your feet.